Back. Mr. Kelly, you're recognized to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the work that you and the staff have done on the tax reform bill to simplify the tax code and lower rates so that more American families can keep more money in their pockets from week to week. Now, while there are a number of worthy provisions in the bill, Mr. Chairman, I am concerned that it does repeal the adoption tax credit. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into a colloquy with you on this issue.
Without objection.
The adoption tax credit is good policy, and it needs to be reinstated in this tax bill and approved so that more American families can afford adoption. Too many of our nation's children remain in the foster care system, longing for a forever home with a loving family. The adoption tax credit is good economic policy because it saves our taxpayers money. It is estimated that the government saves between $65,000 to $127,000 for each child who is adopted rather than being placed in foster care. It also the right policy because it reflects who we are as Americans. And this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is a red, white, and blue issue. We're talking about the most precious asset we have as Americans, and that's the next generation. They are truly our national treasure. Now, they're a gift from God, and they deserve our protection and to be placed in a loving, permanent home if their biological family can no longer provide for them. The adoption tax credit has been in tax code for almost 2 decades, with more than 70,000 families that have availed themselves of the credit in order to bring a child home. In 2014 alone, there were over 4,000 children adopted by Pennsylvania families, with a 95% domestic adoptions. Now's the time to reform this credit so that even more families can bring a child home to a loving family. Mr. Chairman, there's nobody that's more sensitive to this issue than you are. And I know that you are the father, and you and your wife, the father and the mother of 2 adopted children. And I think the only difference in the Brady household is probably that you know they're adopted. I'm sure they don't. I am sure that in the years that you and your wife have raised those children, and I know how much you care about them. We heard about during the terrible floods in Texas, one of those children and what he did in order to save other people. So I got to tell you, my hat is off to you for what you've done with your lifetime of taking care of this issue. So I really would like to get your impression of this, and I want to work with you on this because this is so critical to who we are as Americans.
Absolutely, Mr. Kelly, if you would yield for a moment. I really appreciate what you're saying and your commitment and others on this committee and outside to finding a way to ensure that this bill improves the lives of children across the country. And for me, look, we love adoption. We have 2 boys only because, 2 women in really difficult situations chose life, and they created a family where none existed. And I know that for many families, we have good incentives to help families adopt out of the foster care system, but as they age out, those are big challenges, and we've got to help those children and families as well. I've always worried about the current credit because it doesn't help. It helps many who are of a certain income level, and who qualify, who have a tax liability and itemize. It can help early on in life, but I worry about those families who are modest income. They don't itemize, they don't have a tax liability. They're adopting from the church or from the Pregnancy Assistance Center, or they're helping others do this. I worry that the current credit leaves too many Americans behind. I think we need to find a positive way forward. We had proposed really to use this family tax credit, drive up the child tax credit in amount, for the first time give help to the parents, double the amount of people who can use it. So sort of instead of an adoption credit for some once in their lifetime, we give help to families who don't itemize every year of their lifetime for those kids. It is a debate and a discussion we ought to have. So my thought is we ought to find a way forward in a positive way in this area, because whether you're a Republican or Democrat, adoption is really critical. So I'm going to, at the end of this thoughtful discussion, propose that we not accept Dr. Davis's amendment, but that we work together as men and women to find a good, positive direction forward here. This is an area we all feel strongly about, in my view. And I yield. No time left, Mr.
Yeah, I
Kelly.
know, well.
Absolutely, but I yield.
But I know
back to
there's
you.
so many of us who feel this way. I also want to thank Diane Black. She's not with me right now, but, you know, she has been all over this, and she introduced her bill, H.R. 2476, that would make the adoption tax credit fully refundable. But, Chairman, I appreciate what you're doing and everything that we're moving towards. This is so critical to who we are as a people. Forget about the parties. This is about who we are as the American people.
Yeah.
And I think on that issue, we can come together and actually come up with something. So while I appreciate what Dr. Davis has done, I also say I would oppose his amendment, but I do look forward to the discussion and
We've
us
got some
getting
work
this
to do,
handled.
and I'm confident we can do it.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Yes, Ms. Delbany. Oh, Mr. Lewis, you're recognized to speak on the amendment.
But thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to submit a statement for the record in support of this amendment.
Without objection. Mr. Larson, you're recognized to speak on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you,
I
Mr.
yield
Chair.
to Mr. Davis.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lewis yields. Thanks.
I simply want to appreciate the comments, the dialogue that you and Mr. Kelly have had, and I certainly would look forward to working with you, he, and others who would want to reach forward on this issue. I thank you very much,
No.
and I yield back.
Thank you for your leadership, Dr. Davis.